Among all the stories about the ocean, the legends of ghost ships are perhaps the scariest. The crew of these mysterious ships suddenly disappear, leaving the abandoned vessels to float for days or even years across endless waters. Many believe that all these stories are fiction, but ships without people that appear in the seas and oceans have actually been encountered, and to this day, some defy explanation. Let's take a look at some of the world's most famous examples, real ghost ships. To the ghost ship in Myanmar. In 2018, a huge ominous silhouette was spotted off the southern coast of Myanmar, but the container ship on board, which was marked Ratu Lang RV 1600 itself, did not respond to calls from the Coast Guard. Over the course of a week, it moved closer to the shore and eventually landed on a sandbank. When it finally stopped, Coast Guard personnel boarded but found not a single living soul, crew, or cargo. They could not understand how such a huge ship suddenly ended up in the waters of Myanmar. Authorities began scouring maritime registries and systems for the ship's latest coordinates, and stumbled upon something shocking. It turned out that the container ship was last in Taiwan in 2009, almost 10 years before it arrived in Myanmar. This only added to the growing mystery. Did the ship really drift for 9 years across the South Pacific, South Atlantic and Indian Oceans? If not, then how did he get to the other side of the continent without anyone noticing? It is 177 meters long, so it would be difficult to miss. Myanmar authorities became increasingly concerned when the tugboat was found a few days later 80 kilometers offshore. After interviewing the crew, they learned that the ship was towing a container ship to a landfill in Bangladesh for dismantling, but due to a storm, the cable securing the tug to the large ship broke, and the crew had to abandon it. This explains how it ended up without people or cargo, but authorities have not figured out where it was for 9 years. The investigation continues to this day. Rio Unmaru. When Japan was hit by the massive 2011 tsunami, at least 22 ships either sank, broke up or disappeared due to the huge waves. But one of the ships somehow escaped and sailed into the ocean. It was Rio Unmaru, a 50-meter-long fishing boat that never gave up. True, there was no one on board. In the chaos left after the tsunami, everyone decided that it had sunk like the others, and no one was looking for it. For more than a year, the empty ship drifted across the sea without any course or direction, and suddenly it was spotted off the coast of Alaska. It ended up 200 kilometers from the US-Canada border, and after assessing its condition it was decided it was safe to rescue it. But the old ship had been at sea for a long time, and it had taken its toll. The fuel tank was badly damaged and could not be pumped out, which meant it was impossible to tow it. Fearing that it was dangerous for other ships in the area, the authorities ordered the lone ship to be scuttled where it was. The Coast Guard opened fire with automatic cannons and set fire to the remaining fuel in the ship. Surrounded by the sea and thick smoke, the fishing boat began to slowly sink under the water, and made its last lonely journey to the bottom of the ocean. Jongsen. The real Jongsen ghost ship was discovered off the Australian coast, near Queensland in 2006, and after inspection, the Coast Guard realized that not only was it missing a crew, it had no identifying marks, not even a name. All that the authorities knew was that this vessel was an 80-meter tanker that had been at sea for a very long time. The team searched everything on board, and were eventually able to find several documents that revealed the name of the ship, Jongsen. But not knowing where its port was, they could not find out where it came from. Among other things, they found a huge amount of rice below deck. But since there were no signs of activity, this ruled out the possibility of illegal fishing or smuggling. The ship may have been resupplying fishing vessels outside Australia's 370-kilometre economic zone. The only thing that could be established was that the ship was abandoned a long time ago. And, like real ghost stories, we're unlikely to find out where it came from. Bellimonia. Off the coast of Punta Valpa on the island of Sardinia is often called a millionaire's playground, but its white beaches and blue waters had an uninvited guest in 2006. Not far from the shore, a two-mast sailing ship, worth at least $600,000, drifted ominously. And it seemed there was no captain in it. It almost collided with the rocky shore, but the Coast Guard was able to board and tow it away in time. But what was found on board greatly shocked the security officers. Maps of the Mediterranean, piles of clothing and half-eaten food were scattered around the ship, indicating that someone had clearly been here recently. Even stranger, the ship's GPS navigation system had all its memory erased. Due to such frightening findings, the officers searched the entire ship, but despite the search, they did not find any documents with the name, but they noticed a sign with the inscription Bel Amico, which for some reason was hidden under a pile of sofa cushions. However, when they checked the name with the shipping registry, it turned out that not a single ship had such a name. The situation became ominous and questions arose. Perhaps the owner fell overboard or was used for illegal trade and abandoned. The investigators were at a dead end, and then the owner of the ship himself appeared. Frank Ruera, a Luxembourg citizen, said he was urgently recalled from the ship and left it anchored off the island a couple of days ago. But even more questions arose about why the ship was not registered, why its name was hidden, why the memory of the navigation system was erased. Ruera never answered these questions, and the world was left to continue to wonder why he abandoned ship so suddenly. What do you think is the reason? Fraud, a secret family, maybe an affair with one of the sailors? Share your versions in the comments. Ghost of Lake Superior. When cameraman Jason Iselin came to the shores of Lake Superior in Michigan to film the video in 2016, he was simply hoping to capture a beautiful view on video. However, he received much more than he could have imagined. A huge ghost in the shape of a ship shimmered on the choppy waters of the world's largest freshwater lake. Not believing his eyes, Jason captured this phenomenon on camera. As you can see, this is an incredible sight, but ghost ships are not uncommon here. The fact is that more than 6,000 ships sank on the Great Lakes. 200 of them are located on a long stretch of Upper Whitefish Point Lake, which is located near the Iselina filming site. Of course, I would like to think that it really was a ghost, but the truth is even more interesting. This flickering silhouette is probably a lighthouse on a granite island, somewhere 19 kilometers from the coast where Iselin stood. It seems huge, and this has to do with the way our perception works. Likewise, the sun and moon appear large when they are on the horizon, even though they are not actually closer to us. The video plays the same trick on our eyes. The image is small in size but appears large because it is far away. This is an interesting illusion, but some believe it is an otherworldly phenomenon. For example, the ghost ship, UFO, or Jesus walking on water. What do you think this is? Write in the comments under the video. Fata Morgana. But not only Jason Iselin managed to capture such a mysterious mirage on camera. Photos and videos of ships floating high above the waves or of some strange shape are fueling rumors that there really are fleets and ghosts wandering through our waters. But these ships are not quite what they seem, and it's all because of one phenomenon, the Fata Morgana. This is an illusion that occurs under suitable atmospheric and visual conditions. First, the cold air mass close to the water is covered by a warmer layer of air. Light rays then pass through the channel of these warm and cold layers, causing the light to change its angle and be refracted. But how does bending light create a complete mirage? The point here is how the brain processes the image. When light enters the eyes, the brain assumes that the light has traveled a straight path. In the case of the Fata Morgana, the light bends downward as it passes through the cold air. But our brain places the object where it would be if it were straight ahead. And then he seems taller than he really is. This debunks the theory of ghost quartz. But still, floating tankers or mangled ships look very unusual. Rena. There are ghost ships at sea, but some of them are visible from the shore, as they run aground and rise in a gloomy heap. This is exactly the fate that befell the container ship Rena in 2011. In a hurry to get to New Zealand, the crew of the 236-meter-long vessel decided to take a slight shortcut to meet the deadline. Neglecting the basic rules of navigation, the sailors deviated from the course and sailed straight, but the ship accidentally hit the island's reef because of this idiotic decision. New Zealand didn't have the equipment to tow a boat at the time, but that wasn't the best. Approximately 1,900 tons of the ship's fuel oil began leaking into the sea. 4 days after this, a 5-kilometer strip of fuel oil began to kill the marine fauna of New Zealand. The events were soon called the country's worst maritime environmental disaster, and authorities scrambled to salvage the ship's remains. But the story didn't end there either. The pressure of the waves began to split the ships and almost 90 large steel containers sank into the water. And when it split, like an eerie omen, the waves turned ghostly blue. But it was not a curse, but simply the cargo of the ship, powdered milk, the packages of which dissolved into the sea. At the beginning of 2012, the bow and stern completely separated and continued to slowly sink underwater. New Zealand authorities continued to dismantle the ship, trying to catch it before it completely sank into the sea. More than 24 tons of debris had to be pulled from the seabed. The government really wanted to get rid of any traces of the disaster in its waters. But huge parts of the ship are still at the bottom, and it is unlikely that New Zealand will be able to completely forget this ship. American old. Most of the ships that roamed the oceans were cargo ships, but the American Star was a different kind of vessel. Built in the 1940s as an ocean liner, she went by 7 different names during her illustrious 54-year career: America, Italy, and West Point. In '93, it was sold to a Thai company that had an ambitious plan to restore the ship to its former glory and turn it into a 5-star hotel in Phuket. But when American Star began her 100-day tow from the docks in Greece to her new home in Thailand, disaster struck. A strong storm over the Atlantic caused huge waves that threw the liners from side to side and the tow ropes broke. It was not possible to attach them, and the ship ran aground off the coast of Fort Ventura Island. It lay at such an angle that it was impossible to pull it out or disassemble it. Within 48 hours, powerful waves tore the old ship into 2 parts. Stranded, the ship's aft section became warped and sank under the waves in less than 1 year. However, the bow remained lonely lying near the coast, until it began to slowly sink to the bottom, finally disappearing underwater in the 10th year. Although the liner disappeared, its tragic legacy lives on to this day. Mary Celeste. The story of the Mary Celeste is so dark that even the most stern sailors can cry in horror. In 1872, this sailboat was found more than 600 kilometers from the Azores. The crew's personal belongings remained in their cabins, and the cargo of 1,701 barrels of rectified spirit was almost untouched, properly containing food and water supplies for 6 months. But there was not a single person on board. The only lifeboat was lost, probably along with 10 passengers, including the wife and little daughter of Captain Benjamin Briggs, somewhere in the ocean. Unfortunately, none of them were ever seen again. The mysterious event gave rise to one of the most famous legends about the ghost ship, and researchers are still trying to figure out exactly why people left the ship. There is a version that it was captured by pirates, although this is unlikely, since all the cargo remained on board. Perhaps the crew mutinied, given the abundance of alcohol on the ship. But in this case, why did everyone leave the ship and choose certain death in a small boat? I like the conspiracy theory that people were abducted by aliens. Maybe some alien fell in love with the ship. However, there is another theory, less crazy, and it is based on the state of the sea and the Celeste. When it was first discovered, the cargo hold was filled with about a meter of seawater, and there was even more water in the rest of the ship. But it could sail, as evidenced by the fact that the tug could take the ship all the way to Gibraltar. Moreover, one of the sailboat's pumps was dismantled on deck. It was probably dismantled by the crew before disappearing. Apparently, the ship had undergone some repairs, causing the pumps to become clogged with sawdust and coal dust, but without them, Captain Brix could not understand how much water was getting into the ship's hold. Therefore, there is a version that, fighting for the life of his wife and daughter, and not being able to find out whether his ship would sink or not, the captain decided to give orders to the crew to leave the Mary Celeste. Alas, we will never know what exactly happened to the passengers of the sailing ship, but it continues to live in stories about ghost ships. Alta. When Storm Dennis hit Ireland in February 2020, residents of County Cork were not only left wet, but were surprised when a huge cargo ship washed ashore. It was incredibly rusty, and although it was able to stay afloat in such a strong storm, the 76-meter-long ship was left without a crew. Investigators examined the rusty vessel but found no signs of life. But they found out the name of the ejected giant, Viola. This discovery greatly surprised investigators because Alta's ship had gone missing somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean more than a year ago. He was heading from Greece to Haiti, but suddenly the engines failed 2,000 kilometers from Bermuda. Repairs were impossible, and the crew of 10 decided to abandon ship. They were rescued by the U.S. Coast Guard, who asked the ship's owner to tow it away. But when the tug reached the coast of Guyana, the ship was captured. After that nothing was known, but in September 2019, an ice patrol vessel collided with an Alta in the middle of the Atlantic. Ocean currents carried the ship past the coasts of Africa and Spain, and then it was eventually thrown onto the rocky ridges of Ireland. This was not just a long journey, but a real odyssey. Aircraft carrier Oriskany. This next ship didn't have to wander the seas forever, but the magnitude of its sinking may send shivers down your spine. Oriskany was a USS-class aircraft carrier, which was launched back in 1945. The sailors gave him the nickname Mighty O, and for good reason. Measuring 278 meters in length, it could carry up to 82 aircraft and played an important role in the Korean and Vietnam Wars before being scrapped in June 1994 after almost 50 years of service. The ship was dismantled and the question arose of what to do with its rusty remains. The Navy's best and brightest began to speculate, and after receiving the go-ahead from the Environmental Protection Agency, they decided to sink it in the Gulf of Mexico, but not to train other ships. Oriskany became the largest ship in the world that was deliberately sunk to make an artificial roar. In May 2006, it was towed 38 kilometers from Pensacola and loaded with more than 200 kilograms of explosives. The explosion was deafening. And 37 minutes later the mighty ship sank into the sea. It now sits 68 meters below the surface, and instead of carrying planes and people, it supports an underwater ecosystem of corals, plants, and roars. This is how the military ship began to help the environment. Yacht Ghost. In April 2007, 3 men boarded a yacht and sailed to Australia, thinking they would have a wonderful trip there. Without Batten and Peters brothers, John Townsend planned to spend 2 months at sea, full of rest and sun. But their yacht Kaz 2 was discovered 160 kilometers from the coast 5 days later, without people on board. The engine was running, there was a half-drunk cup of coffee on the table, and the laptop was still turned on in the main cabin. And worst of all, the life jackets were left on the yacht. It was as if the men had disappeared into thin air. The yacht was in good condition, although one sail was completely torn. Fearing that passengers had fallen overboard, authorities began searching for the men. Unfortunately, their traces were never found. Desperate to find clues, investigators thoroughly searched and examined everything on the ship, and as a result, they stumbled upon a chilling video recording. This was the last time the men were seen alive, the morning before departure. In the video, they were laughing and fishing, but then noted that the blue sky suddenly began to look somehow threatening. Despite this, some have suggested that the men staged the disappearance for insurance purposes. However, the coroner later came to the conclusion that it was all due to a series of accidents. Probably one of the brothers fell into the water while he was trying to get a fishing line that got caught in the yacht's propeller. Then another brother jumped overboard to save him. Intending to help his friends, Batten tried to turn around yacht, but a sudden wind began to rock the ship, and the Batten also fell overboard. That is, all three men appeared to be in the water, and their yacht quickly sailed away, taking with it any chance of saving the unfortunate passengers. Taiching 21. The thought of a ship lost in the ocean is terrifying in itself, but for the crew of Taiching 21 it was just the beginning. In 2008, a gutted small fishing boat was discovered off the coast of Kiribati. The 50-ton vessel was empty and large parts were badly burned and charred. Investigators' hearts sank when they realized there was likely a massive fire here. When the ship caught fire, 29 crew members and the captain were forced to choose either to burn alive or to remain in the open ocean on the boards. But worst of all, the hull of the ship was no longer smoking, which meant that the fire had forced the sailors to abandon it several days earlier. It turned out that the last signal from this ship was received on October 28, and the charred remains were found on November 9. If the men survived, they could have been at sea for almost 2 weeks, and the food and water they could take would have long since run out. There was no time to waste, and the search operation began. Rescuers from the US and New Zealand took to the skies while the Fiji Navy scoured the sea, searching more than 54 square kilometers. But 36 hours later, neither the captain nor the crew had been found. The rescuers gradually came to terms with the situation, and as the sun set, the operation was ended, leaving hope of finding the crew alive. Lyubov Orlova. If some ghost ships are famous because of the missing crew, then Lyubov Orlova made something else famous. Her size. Measuring 220 meters in length and weighing 1,565 tons, the cruise ship was hard to miss. The ship was considered the Soviet Queen of the Seas in the 70s, but rising maintenance costs and poor management turned the liner into a ghost ship. In 2011, a Canadian inspection found a host of problems with this old queen, from burst pipes and mold to rat infestations and structural damage. No one could pay for the repairs and the long downtime at the docks, and so the ship was sold for scrapping to the Neptune Shipping Company, but it stood in the bay for another year, deteriorating more and more. As a result, in January 2013, the ship, in deplorable condition, was attached to a tugboat to be taken to a landfill in the Dominican Republic. But Orlova had other plans. A day after sailing, the cable broke and the ship began to drift. The crew tried to restore communication, but due to strong winds and stormy weather it did not work out. The responsibility fell on the official owner, Neptune, but the company did not even develop a rescue plan. Fearing the ship would collide with an oil platform, Canadian authorities rushed to the rescue and briefly gained control of it. But the tow ropes broke again. Because of the storm, it was impossible to reattach the lines, so the authorities decided to leave the ship aground in international waters, and then it suddenly disappeared. For several weeks no one could see the huge cruise ship in the North Sea. Many believed that it simply sank quickly. However, at the end of February 2013, he was spotted again, 2,400 kilometers from Ireland. Then he apparently headed towards Europe, but after that no one saw Orlova's love. Which of these ghost ships would you like to see? Tell us in the comments under the video. Thank you for watching.